Hey everybody, it is TechChat Tuesday for Tuesday, June 7th, 2022. I'm Ken Rimple and I'm doing this from home because we actually have a series of meetings tomorrow and it's been a long weekend and just come off of a conference trip. So just want to kind of do a quick opening for the tech chat and kind of go through some news items we have. And then I'm going to throw it over to myself and Drew DeCarme and Chris Birster talking about Remix Run, which is the conference we attended in Salt Lake City last week. First things first, this happened a little bit ago, about a little under a week ago, but there was a set of issues that have come up with various platforms. So security updates for Google's Chrome browser, for Android, for Zoom, and iOS for some serious vulnerabilities. So if you are on Apple devices, there's a bunch of 15.5 and also 11.6.6 Big Sur updates that you want to look at. It's probably the last iOS 15 point update according to this Wired article by, who was this by? Kate O'Flaherty. So make sure you update those. Turns out none of these are being used in specific attacks, which is good. Also, they have some issues that are already being used in macOS, tvOS, and Apple Watch, of all things, which apparently lets code BX to hit current privileges. So update all your devices. Had some fun with their Patch Tuesday that didn't go so well, according to this. So we should probably, if you have any Windows devices, check that out. So of course, if you're in an enterprise, they're going to update it for you. But if you're not, and if you're on your own computer, you can go ahead and get updates for all these different systems from Microsoft's Windows Update. If you're on Firefox 100. So Firefox 100.0.2 has a number of different high severity issues. And then there's, of course, Android fixes, and Chrome 102 came out as well. I'll post this link and we'll make sure that you can take a look at those at your leisure. So that's article number one. The next one, lots of stuff happened at WWDC today. So they announced a new iOS, a new Mac OS. They also have a new processor and new laptops. Okay, so first of all, iOS 16. iOS 16 is having a lot of changes, specifically around the lock screen, according to this IGN article here. It looks a lot different. They've got little widgets on the lock screen now, and for things like weather and things like that. You'll be able to customize so things looking like customizing font and color elements and things like that. Interesting. So anyway, so that's going on. Now there are focus filters that the apps, so you can have focus filters to filter out things like messages and calendar and stuff like that. And also you've got a number of other updates as well. So there's a bunch of stuff on this article about that. I'll scroll down a little bit. WatchOS 9's come out. So there's interesting things like what your running form looks like, heart rate target zones, things like that. I guess if you were someone who actually was able to survive through multi-sport workouts, like a triathlon, well, there you go. You can train for those on your watch. Different watch faces and things like that. So lots of cool stuff. There's a nice update to the calendar app. Apparently custom workouts are in this thing. So there's a lot of different changes for watchOS, which is great. The big announcement is the M2 chip. So the M2 chip now has 25% more GPU performance and 18% overall performance updates from M1, according to them. And look at this, up to 24 gigs of memory. So even on a MacBook Air, you can get past that 16 gig limit. So that'd be a nice little laptop for developers for trips. You've got so for 6 screens, you've got an 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU as an option too, and nice fast memory bandwidth. So lots of good stuff. And it looks like you can even potentially get 8K video. And there's a MacBook Air that was announced with it as well. Looks like a thinned down MacBook Pro, according to this article, with an M1 chip in it. and it says 18-hour battery, I believe. Now this is also interesting. Yeah. The new MacBook Air also has MagSafe. Notice that. That's a nice little thing. And with a new AC adapter, you'll get 80% charge in 20 minutes, which is fantastic. And it's only $1,199 starters. I guess that's probably a 16 gig model. And of course, they're upgrading the MacBook Pro and making an M2 processor on that as well. There's a new update to Mac OS 13 Ventura, and it looks like that one, the big update there is something called Stage Manager, kind of puts all your apps in kind of a single window mode. They're also, I believe, doing this in iOS as well. So basically, have like a single window mode that kind of moves things off to the left, so you can kind of see all the things you've been working on newest first. And there's a bunch of app improvements. Looks like Metal 3, which is a gamer update for upscaling low resolution using AI. So you can basically get faster games because you have a lower resolution, but they're upscaled and you can increase the frame rate so it'll look good. And so this is kind of interesting. All right, iPad OS 16 also center stage. That's kind of what it looks like there, where you've got your current app, one working on constantly behind it. A fair number of things as well. So you get the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. You'll get the new reference color mode, and there's a display zoom that lets you boost your pixel density. All sorts of good stuff in here. And apparently now we get a weather app for iOS 16, which is, I guess, big news because we didn't have one for the iPad. We had it for the phone, but it never really had the official one for the iPad. So that's coming. So anyway, that's the stuff happening at WWDC. There is something I'm keeping my eye on, which is, and I'll post about it if I find something useful. There's a whole discussion tomorrow. It's being released from WWDC that you can watch talking about virtualization of Mac and other platforms using virtualization. I think it's called Manager, which is part of the SDK, part of the Apple's SDKs. So we'll see what that looks like, and I'll post about that when I find more out. But that's coming out tomorrow, that talk. There's an interesting article on developer burnout on codesubmit.io by Nicole Cow, talking about different techniques to fight burnout, why it happens, how you can combat it. If you're a manager looking out for your team, so this looks really interesting. I haven't really digested it enough yet, but gave it a quick pass. It even talks about, like, people dealing with pandemic issues and people who maybe hit COVID, or parents that are dealing with lots of kid issues, especially if you've got kids in school and they've gone through pandemic issues. It's just rough. Anyway, so a lot of interesting stuff here if you're dealing with burnout. They even go through, for example, the different stages of burnout. And so some food for thought for people if you're kind of feeling a little wiped out and wondering what options there are to help you out. There's a nice article. Also, found this just before I did this tonight, Python 3.11 performance benchmarks. So Python 3.11 is the next release upcoming. They've got some really nice performance increases over previous versions. So for example, what they're seeing here is, and I'll quote this from the article, which is written by Michael Larabelle on Phoronix.com. It says, in basic support tasks in AIO, fine-grained locations and tracebacks, self-typed return instance of class, and other features. It says, besides affecting Python language itself, it's been landing performance work from the faster Python project to speed up the reference implementation. This is the cool part of this. They say it's 10 to 60% faster than Python 3.10 and a 1.22 times speed up with a standard benchmark speed. So you're going to get better performance by going to Python 3.11. And that's coming out sometime around October. So keep an eye for that if you're a Python developer. There's nice little performance bumps coming if you get to Python 3.11. Okay, last, I'm just going to put this up on the screen. The Remix framework. So myself, Drew DeCarme, and Chris Birster, we all went out to Salt Lake City to the Remix conference, Remix Run conference, and they held that for 2 days last week, a day of workshops, and then a day on the framework itself, like talks and such. And it was really interesting. What we did was we recorded ourselves a little video where we discussed the conference, everything we talked about, what we were looking for, what we got out of it, and what we thought about where everything was. So if you don't know anything about Remix, Remix is a meta framework on top of React, and it lets you do things like server-side rendering and parallel rendering of nested routes. And it's really, really optimized for developer experience. So for example, if you're writing code and you're building server-side code that runs React, you'll get things like the fetch API and the web form API. So you're looking for form data, just like you would in a browser. You can pull your forms in and validate them on the server side using the same APIs that you would use on the web. It's got so many nice features. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw over to us talking on Friday of last week to discuss Remix Run, and hopefully this is useful for you. And we'll see you in a couple weeks with the rest of our summer's tech chats. Also, I think we're going to move over to Thursdays. So more about that on the Twitter feed at TechCast and at Chariot Solution. All right. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we have the Remix Run Chariot team here. We went to the conference last week in Salt Lake City. Chris Birster, Drew DeCarme, and me, Ken Rimple. So I wanted to do this just because, it was an interesting conference, and I think it's a newer technology with a new conference itself around it. I mean, it was only open sourced in what was it, October of last year, right?
Yeah, it hasn't been long.
No. So I wanted to kind of get us together and just chat a little bit about what we've learned. And so why don't we start off just by talking about, like, before you went to the Remix Run conference, what did you know about it, and what did you want to know going into the conference? So I can start if you want. So I knew like the server-side rendering from Remix. I'd done a talk at Chariot for ETE and then one for Philly Tech Week around Remix, comparing it to Next.js, and I focused mostly on the server-side stuff. But I didn't really know the developer experience or the patterns well enough to be anything more than a complete novice at it. Build things from. So what I do is get that out of it. What do you guys think? Chris, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So I guess before the conference, I threw the tutorial on Remix. It was the jokes app that Ken posted, and it was pretty much like a full stack tutorial there. So a lot of the stuff that we did in the workshop was related to it. Nested routes from the workshop itself. It seems like a lot of stuff changed since I did that tutorial as far as like imports and how to like organize the app itself. So it was a learning experience as well.
How about you, Drew? I know that you did some work with Remix, so.
Yeah, so I've been in the process in the background building out a online e-commerce store for sort of my own personal business that I'm creating. I won't plug it here, but I'm on the look for new tech, right? So previously, I think before the days of Angular and React, it seemed like there was a new way, like a new rendering framework coming out or a new library, right? So Angular, then React and Vue, right? Now there tends to be a lot of standardization around those technologies. So you're seeing a lot more frameworks and a lot more ways of using the library than you are necessarily like actually having a new library per se.
Yeah.
So, Next.js came out. Gatsby was definitely, I think, probably one of the first server-side rendering frameworks for React. So there's a lot of standardization around React, and Remix was another technology that came to the forefront, and they really, I think they personally did a pretty good job of kind of rethinking the overall developer experience for creating these apps. So what was I looking to get out of it? I was just kind of looking to understand a little bit more, trying to understand the team a little bit more, some of their motivations. That at these conferences they tend to talk a little bit more about why they did things than how they did things. So I was looking to understand more about that. And then obviously I want to understand a little bit more about the nuance of the app of the framework, right? So every framework does things a little bit differently. With Next.js, you see static rendering is a really big thing, where Remix, they're kind of pushing the boundaries and saying, hey, your servers are probably going to be pretty fast. Let's try to get your content to you as fast as possible rather than render things statically. So it's a new way of looking at an old render library. Yeah, like in job, like 6 months could be old, right?
2 hours.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a new way of looking at it, and I want to understand a little bit more. I think it was a good conference to go to personally. I thought it was insightful because you have, I don't want to say the hitters JavaScript like community, but you have Ken, who's got who pretty much rewrote the book on testing, and then you have Ryan, who's been out there for training for God knows how many years. So you have some of the really big names getting together and taking a lot of their knowledge and trying to push it further. So that was really exciting to see. So when you got some good backers behind it, it's hard to ignore it.
Yeah. And it is like the first conference they ever did with this. So like, you got to give them credit. That's a lot to do in a conference. Let's talk a bit about the workshop itself. Now, unfortunately, I flew in morning of the workshop and missed an hour of it up front, but there was a lot. So not only do I look at the workshop from the way it runs during the workshop itself, but what you learn coming out of it, whether it's short or long term. And I did feel like there was a lot of really good stuff in there, like a lot of discussions about the mechanics and strategies for handling things, like whether you're doing, the one thing I didn't realize that was really useful was the inline form mechanisms versus, routing to an answer through an action of a form, which I thought was pretty cool. So like the sample was really useful for me because it had a whole lot of those patterns baked into it. So, I just got like I got a good flow of what general developer tasks would be out of that. And some of the more, I would say, advanced, not obvious from the website and tutorials, unless you're really digging, it's all there for me to look at and take a look at code later. What do you guys think of the workshop?
Yeah. I mean, I thought the workshop, can I go, Chris?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I should have said, Drew, why don't you go?
No, it's okay. So I thought the workshop was pretty good. And someone made a tweet, I think at the end of the first, or at the end of the workshop, saying that Remix makes all of the hard stuff simple and keeps all the simple stuff simple. And I think the kind of general theme of it, right? So perennially in any React application, the hardest thing is managing your data on the page, right? And there's a couple different ways that I've come across doing it. First, when React came out, it was single state Redux at the top of the application. So that managed your state across the page. Then let's say that Next came out and they published a package, SWR, which is a hook when React went full hooks in 16 and 17. And that's a way of, hey, we can call this hook and we can get cache data. So that was a way to not store everything at the global state. So that's hard too, because, depending upon, you have to have a knowledge of what's going on your page in order to mutate the data that's on your page. So one of the big things that I sort of discovered with Remix is that they offload all of that. So on your page, you have these concepts of loaders and actions. And depending upon the type of loader they have on the page, when you submit a request to the backend or you run an action, Remix automatically knows all the different loaders that are on your page and they refresh them, right? So the knowledge of trying to figure out, where do I need to pass my mutations? Do I need to have them at a higher point in the React tree? That goes away. Redux goes away. Context pretty much goes away outside of your independent components. So managing that data in essence is a lot. It's done for you, and that's nice because you can focus on some of the finer points of the browser. Like you can actually focus on styling right now because first, let's say that you spend 2 weeks on a feature and you're focused on making sure all the functionality works because you're making sure you're focused on syncing all the data and getting like a a reliable source of truth out of it. But now, since that's all offloaded to you, you don't really have to worry about that anymore. So it's a matter of taking care of like accessibility, experience, styles, getting those things down, which are pretty much at the core of the entire user experience. So that was probably one of the main takeaways that I saw, where like that stuff is hard as hell, and it's
Yeah.
it's tough coming up with an architecture to manage that. And they took all that and just do it for you.
Chris, what
And
do you
I'm
think? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So, like coming to the conference, I guess most of my work experience is on the back end, but I
Mhm.
have built a lot of like production React apps, and Remix is kind of like a shift for me thinking because so I guess a lot of the applications that I've written, it uses hooks heavily. I like use state and use effect, use callback, and all those.
Mhm.
And a lot of like, I guess, glue code to kind of work with like submitting data. A lot of like the events using like prevent default and stuff like that. I'll need to use to do like the client side work for that. So with Remix, I thought it was like very interesting. Like Drew was saying that you have these like loaders and actions that Remix knows how to work with. So loading data, instead of like loading data from like an API like I'm used to, an API endpoint, it's pretty much Remix is kind of like a full stack framework in that you can actually load data like directly from your database and stuff on the server side. But that server side code like never hits the browser side, which I thought was very interesting looking at that aspect.
Yeah, it's the whole theme. I think was like a Back to the Future kind of theme. Like you're going back into like the ways we programmed in a way in the 90s with web. Well, I shouldn't say one, the aughts, let's call it, with like request response, HB form data, standards that are built around and used in the actions server side. Like I just did samples this week as I was building up some stuff from what I learned, even just doing some CRUD stuff. I'm like, my God, this is so much more straightforward. You both said, like, you don't need a state machine. You just, you build your data fetches into the loaders, you throw the loader data in, you use the hook for use loader data, and it's there. And then from a validation perspective, I was playing with that for a day or two with various ways of doing it. And then Drew, we were talking briefly about like just validation techniques. Like I would get server-side validation with some simple, stupid, naive validators. But you had mentioned like Zog, for example. And I think you said the creator of Zog was sitting in front of you at the conference. Is that right?
Yeah, I had to finish out some work for a
It's funny.
client. I saw the guy like he was 2 seats ahead of me. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah, there were some good people at that conference for sure, or some people who have created some really valuable tools and useful tools.
Yeah, definitely. So point being, like you kind of have some options that are simpler than like creating a client side and server side shape of data to pass back and forth and serialize and deserialize and throw through. It's much more organic, I think. And that's what I really enjoyed seeing in the workshop. How about the talks that we saw? So, there were a bunch of talks, a lot of shorter talks. I think hopefully next year they'll have some longer ones that are more in depth, but then conference. So it's like you're assembling from a smaller community at first, but it was a pretty engaged community, which is really great. Um, so I can say a few things. So I did like John Jensen's incremental remix talk. He's a Netflix guy, and I think he was talking about a prior place he worked too. But he was basically talking through some strategies for going from a straight complete client side React app, installing remix, and slowly moving endpoints over to it. I thought that was really useful. What about you guys? Are specific talks? I have a couple others, but I don't want to talk through all of mine first because some of them might be yours.
Yeah,
So,
Chris, I was
Chris, do you remember? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was going to say that one of the tops that I can think of is like the incremental remix as well.
Mhm.
Getting that team or management buy-in is really important, and also having to look at, I guess, your overall strategy and like how to implement that is very useful in trying to introduce these new like third-party tools.
How about you, Drew? Any of the ones that spoke to your fancy?
yeah, I'm gonna go with the softball here. Ryan Dahl's talk was
Ryan
awesome.
Dell's talk.
Honestly, it looked like he just got off the plane and he just rolled up and he had like his backpack on.
Yes.
so casually gave like a really poignant talk. But he kind of gave like this talk about Dino deploying like a remix on application on Dino deploy. But then he talked a little bit about how remix changed how things were deployed on. It's almost like deployment agnostic, not necessarily, but they have to have a specific runtime for it. But you can deploy Remix on Netlify, and you can deploy Remix on Dino Deploy, Cloudflare Pages, which are all serverless, which is just sort of like this abstraction over Cloudflare workers. So you can build Remix and deploy it on these browser-based runtimes that aren't necessarily like Node runtimes, and they aren't necessarily like they're basically like some sort of derivation of a JavaScript runtime. And you can deploy it kind of anywhere you want. It could be at the edge, it could be on a Node server, so on and so forth. But it was really interesting. Ryan kind of challenged him at the end that, yeah, there might eventually be native runtime support for Remix, So that's kind of, he talked about his dream stack, right? What is my dream stack? And obviously his dream stack is well beyond, like, I knew like half the things he talked about.
Yeah.
But he really kind of challenged the team, like, hey, can we take this one step further, and can we add native support in these runtimes for Remix? And that's how, the speed that Ryan was talking about is like 1/10 of a second, and he showed not even text, like milliseconds, absolute milliseconds, and he's like, we can get absolute faster with this stuff, and that was kind of the challenge. So I thought Ryan's talk was awesome. I'm just going through discussing now.
Yeah.
The Remix one with Rust was pretty compelling. I wish there was more time for that. I really do. But that was very. I know nothing about Rust, but that was pretty compelling. And it's like the new hotness right now. Everyone's talking about Rust.
Right. Build tools in Rust and things like that. Like, is it Next.js that has the replacement of their build tools Rust based now? I think that was
yes. It's SWC, Speedy Web Compiler, I believe.
Is that what it is?
I think so. I think that's what it's called.
Oh, can I go back to the Ryan Dahl one for just a second? So what I thought was interesting, and then I'll let you go. I'll unleash you. Was the post Unix future part of his talk. So his whole point was, we started out, we were, virtualizing runtimes, and we ultimately got to Docker and thinner runtimes and things like that. Now serverless has really blown it apart and made it so that you can really optimize the hell out of the runtime and make it really quick to kick off things for very, very low cost. So he was showing that demo at fresh.deno.dev, which was kind of a hacking around framework. But he had, like, in his deploy platform, Deno Deploy, which is the thing he did after Deno, he says he's got like 32 regions out there, and he was able to deploy across all the regions with deploy in less than 10 seconds, which is nuts. So you're seeing so much innovation out there, especially him being the one that created Node and knows all the warts of Node. And in fact, if you haven't seen his talk on like what I did wrong with Node, I forget the name of it, but I'll find it and I'll post it as part of this talk. It's fantastic. It's a couple years old. He's like, yeah, I know I did that. I'm sorry. This is what I'm looking at doing when I built Deno or Deno. Anyway, so I just thought that was really cool. And he was powering it through Netlify and Supabase Edge functions, I think. Or at least Deno Deploy, or Deno is powering those as well. So he's like building Deno into different runtimes. Anyway, go ahead on the rest of them. I'm sorry. And Chris, after that, if you have a couple more, if you're thinking of some, I have one or two as well.
Yeah, all of them were pretty compelling, I think. Some were better than others, for sure. I really thought Algolia did a nice job. That was at the end. They did a nice job. But yeah, those are kind of the ones that really stand out in my head. Some of the talks I think I would have liked to see were, I guess, a little bit shorter than I thought they probably should have been. But at the same point in time, like that's kind of how things go at conferences. You need to get like time slotted out. That kind of scheduling became difficult. But Ryan's was my favorite, I think, just because it was so poignant, and it was so it was so concise that I think I just really enjoyed the fact that he came in, put his thing down, made a challenge, and then kind of, I think, just bounced.
For sure. Yeah, I think you could wheel him in from anywhere, even asleep, and go, and he'd be like, yeah, and I'm going to talk about Deno, and all of a sudden he knows everything.
He started his talk off saying, like, yeah, I usually like write these maybe like the night before, and how many keynotes is he giving, right?
I don't want to claim that I've done that, but I've winged it a little more than I'd like to, but he's really good at doing it. Yeah. Oh my God. So the one that I wish was longer, because the guy had a lot of good information, was the Stale Wall Revalidate talk from Scott Schmerchek. it was a 5-minute talk. I'm like, man, I could listen to him talk for an hour about this stuff. Tell us your techniques. So I'm really hoping next year they give some people a longer platform, because there's so much knowledge in there that I would love to see more, for example, from that kind of thing. Just looking at the different caching options, what to set, like how often do you revalidate, and how often do you check, that kind of thing, and what it does for your application. So I thought that was pretty cool. Okay. Chris, did you have anything else, or?
No, that's it for me.
Okay. Okay. So then let me get back to my notes here, because I just lost them on the screen. There they are. How about hallway conversations with people? Drew, I know you were networking with the team a little bit, which is cool. I know, Chris, you were talking to some people too. I talked to, mostly I was coding and learning, but I talked to the people from Prisma. I never ran into Prisma before. I looked at the tutorials and looked at the Blues stack. Like, they have stacks you can install for people who haven't looked at Remix. There's a way of creating through NPM. You can create a platform completely configured for 3 different ways that they've given you patterns for, and then you can also do your own stacks. And one's called the Blue Stack, and it has a whole bunch of deployment mechanisms and like everything set up for it. But it used Prisma for the schema management, for writing and maintaining code, kind of like migration. It is a migrations tool. And I've worked with a lot of other migrations tools that I thought Prisma is pretty darn good. So I was talking to that team, and I know that early on I ran into Prisma. They were a GraphQL company. They were Graphicool, I think was the name of the company.
Yeah.
GraphQL. And they then pivoted because they saw that like the power was really in this migrations framework in Prisma. So I had a nice conversation with the guy that was running sales for them, and just got a good feel about the organization. I think they're definitely just quite well. Anything notable from the hallway conversation you guys got? Drew, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. I actually got the chance to talk to Kent Dodds and
Dodds, yeah.
a little bit, yeah. One of the things I thought was interesting is as I was going through my Remix explorations, as I'm starting to build out this online store, I'm using Medusa Commerce. So shout out to the Medusa team; they're doing an awesome job. But I'm a TypeScript fanatic. I love TypeScript. I think that goes along the line of what Kent and Ryan are really stressing too, that TypeScript is a huge help. But when it stinks, you can just ignore it. One of the conventions that you're starting to see is, like, I think it was started with Next, where you can have these various named exports inside of a specific directory. Get static props, get server side props. Now with Remix, it's action loader, so on and so forth. That it was interesting because Kent, as I was going through this, I found something about Kent, who posted on the TypeScript issue, saying that, is there any support, or is there any future support for typing out an entire ES module rather than just typing a specific function? And I thought that was interesting, because ostensibly what that does is it allows you to say, I want this file or this module to be typed a certain way, and it's going to require you to export certain functions that are going to be already typed. So you could say that this is going to be a Remix module, right? And then when you export a specific function, it's already going to support typing for that, where you don't have to import the specific types around, like an action, like a Remix. I don't know what the actual type is called, but like a Remix action or Remix loader, so on and so forth. So I talked to Ken. I was like, Ken, I saw that's awesome. I was looking for the same support. Has there been traction in that? And he said, no, there hasn't. So in so many words, the issue has kind of gotten ignored, but he was telling me people from the Next team, people from the Gatsby team, pretty much every framework around React is who uses TypeScript is looking for that kind of support. So that I thought was really interesting too. And I also talked to Ken a little bit about like his role in the project, and a lot of the mechanisms have just been this really collaborative effort between Michael and Ryan, but Ken has kind of come in and really put his touch on the developer experience part of it, right? He's putting his UI UX on the DX, if you will. He's really come in to be Ryan and Michael's sounding board on what's an acceptable way of doing things, and I think Kent has a really good pulse on
he does.
a really good finger on kind of what what the community's expecting. I mean, the guy rewrote the book on testing and the virtual DOM testing. So that's awesome right there. So, it was really good to just get a quick understanding of the level that his involvement was at, as well as let's push the TypeScript team to make module typing, because that ultimately is going to make the developer experience that much better in these frameworks, right? So you can really enforce your conventions rather than having people import 5 or 6 types and kind of enforce your conventions. So that was pretty cool.
Chris, what about you? Did you have any interesting hallway conversations with people?
Yeah. So the guy Scott who did the caching talk, it was only like a 5-minute talk, but actually during the lunch hour, we were able to get more info from him, just from, I guess they did their rewrite of their website in Remix, and they were able to use like caching like to their advantage. I think one of the things that they cached was like the locations of I guess his company's the disc golf locations website.
Yeah, that was cool.
Website. I thought it was really cool that they were able to like shave off like 10 or like 20s of seconds just from like caching those locations and stuff.
Yeah, shout out to him. UDisc is the company name. That was a really cool lunch that we had when we were talking to those guys.
Yeah, we ate lots of them.
Wasn't that cool? Yeah.
3 more disc fanatic people that I've ever met. Like they love disc golf.
That's true.
Your app was pretty intense too. It went pretty deep.
Yeah,
awesome.
And it was nice and quick too. I really liked how quick it fired up. Cool. Okay. And then how about any hacking around with Remix? So I know I spent time. I have a little bit more time lately, just because of the schedule and what I'm working on to build some code. But I found that being on the plane and hacking around was really helpful too. I certainly was able to do a lot more with it once I went to the conference and saw more details than I could have done beforehand, just because I had a nice centering based on the talk. But anybody have any reflections on that? And it's a very vague question, so
I have answers.
It's kind of my list that's like,
Yeah.
For me, there's it made me realize that like there's a lot of stuff that there's a lot of stuff that's built into like the browser APIs that I didn't know about. Like a link, like for a link you can prefetch I guess the route itself, which I thought was pretty interesting. I didn't know that before Remix.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I guess as far as layout of a Remix app, something that I've noticed, and it looks like it's intentional. Like there's like an underscore folders in there, like underscore app and some other stuff, which I haven't really found like in the documentation why exactly that is, but definitely something that I'm still learning as well.
Yeah, they're basically hidden from the path, but they're part of the structure, which is kind of nice. So you can physically organize things and not have them contribute to the path so much in the routes, which is really neat. I just happened to have used that in my sample I was doing. So pretty cool stuff.
Interesting convention around like very, very strict pages architecture, nested routing architecture. It allows you to.
That whole thing is amazing, right? I mean, just the fact that the way they've broken it up, so in the paths, each of them are components that can contain the other components in a template fashion, like outlets, and they all can load in parallel if the data can load in parallel. That is really cool stuff.
So they have an issue out right now, or not an issue, conversation
enhancement.
Right?
Yeah,
I guess that's what, I don't know what it's called in GitHub. It's called something, but it's essentially around, let's create a specification on flat-based file routing. So coming up more with conventions, and the main issue here was I have all these nested routes, and I have a lot of logic now contained inside of these nested routes. But what's my page structure? How can I get an overview of like what all my pages are? And that's a main driver behind creating what they're calling, and I think it's like an RFC or something. They're calling like flat-based file routing. So the names of the directories are going to be the convention on how the application determines what pages are where. That way you open up your routes directory or in Next.js is your pages directory, you can see all of your pages at every level of nesting, right? So I think they're kicking that idea around right now. That was
Very
been
cool.
my major beef too. It's like there's these specific conventions of like _ app and then settings index. I'm like, well, that's awesome, but to someone coming into like a project not really understanding sort of the nuances of file-based routing and how Remix interprets that for the React router, it can be a little like unwieldy. So I think they got a lot of cool stuff coming up in the pipeline too.
Yeah, and I think they'll be, with Kent on board, I think that they'll be continually improving the docs, and like we had talked about the developer experience, and like just teaching people how that works with more samples and better clarification. I think will be good over time. It'll be interesting to see what they do in a year as this thing is rolling forward.
So like when I was hacking around with it, actually building a production grade app, I've gone, and Ken, I've been telling you this, I've gone all in on Cloudflare. So all my image hosting is done through Cloudflare Images. All my Remix hosting is done through Cloudflare Pages. What else have I done? I've released a couple of. I'm actually developing an API that's proxying through the back end on Cloudflare Workers, right? Because I need to be able to access my API through, not just through my Remix app, but through other means, right? Either through Postman or through like other workers. I meant to talk to the Prisma team about this, but I've been using the Prisma data proxy to be able to manage the connections in between the database and the serverless workers too, inside of Cloudflare Workers too. So I've gone all in on Cloudflare, and the support for it's just unmatched. It's awesome. It's so easy to deploy. It's so ungodly fast. There's no latency whatsoever. It's just super fast. And then like I mentioned this earlier before, that the biggest pain point is, all right, I did it. I did something. Like I mutated some data. What does a screen look like after you mutate that data? And you can go through your React tree at certain varying levels in like a Next app or a Gatsby app or just a regular Create React app. And you can do all that stuff. And then you can realize, crap, like I need to find some way to be able to pass this function or access this function deep in the React tree that mutates my page. With Remix, I actually spent a good half an hour looking around for this convention, only to realize that they just do it out of the box for you. So it was like this revelation. I was like, wait a minute, I don't have to do that. I don't have to like
just handle.
Refresh my page like imperatively or declaratively through like an effect or anything like that. No, Remix just takes care of all of that for you, which is so satisfying. It's so nice.
It's like code goes away that you'd have to do to manage these things of complexity before.
Yeah.
It's really great that way. It's funny, if I saw one more talk where they were mentioning, look, and it just works with JavaScript turned off. I'm like, yeah, we all know by now. But it was funny because before we started, you wouldn't have thought about that. But since it's so baked into the framework to just be stable if you use their form components and actions, it's just there, And so by the end, it was like, duh. But the thing is, it's duh on that framework. What about the rest of the world?
Yeah. Yeah, they're doing an awesome job. I'm looking forward to seeing what else comes of it. There's the funny thing too was none of them take themselves seriously. They are a very laid back team. Because you get to that point of notoriety where you could kind of think that you're really creating like the new framework, but at multiple times during the workshop, Ryan took the time to just make sure everyone got back down to earth, or at least brought himself back down to earth.
Yes.
But it's really entertaining too, because he's very self-deprecating in his aim, but extremely knowledgeable. He'll be self-deprecating and then he'll just rip through an example very, very fast, and we're like, oh, well, he actually, he's no joke.
Humble and smart is a great thing.
Yeah. Same thing with Ken. Like Ken's like the nicest dude on the planet.
He is.
So it was a lot of fun to network with them, see kind of their demeanor on how they present themselves, and I think it really sets the tone for what they're going to accomplish in the future.
Anything else, like as we wrap up here? Anything about like the locale of the event, setting at all, like Salt Lake City? Any thoughts, Chris? What do you think? I dragged you to the mountains. I'm sorry.
I enjoyed it out there. First time in Salt Lake City. First time in Utah in general. And Just a great location. The venue was great. I like the surrounding area. We got to go to like Park City and saw the Olympic Village. Really, really cool place to be.
Yeah, nice setting, truly. All right.
Yeah, picturesque. You know,
Well,
I mean, the
guys,
view never gets
yeah.
old. Getting off the plane and seeing, you
So
know,
true.
13,000-foot mountains.
You
That never
had
gets
you'd lived there for a little while, so it was kind of cool
Yeah.
to have a local guide to get places, which was fun too.
Yeah. I'd like them to do it in the winter so I can go out and snowboard personally.
Yeah, there you go.
That'd be
Mhm.
nice. Or
I could
maybe
break a leg.
Yeah, like April. Yeah, you're gonna have a couple of people missing the second day because they came back in an ambulance instead of their car.
Don't laugh. That happened at the Angular conference one year.
Really?
The people went on a ski trip, and I think a couple of people got pretty badly hurt. They went, but they were, limping.
Well, that's how you control liability then. Have it in the summer. Good job, guys. Keep it up.
All right, gentlemen, thanks so much for recapping the Remix Run conference with you. I really appreciate it. Chris Birster and Drew DeCarme from Chariot Solutions.
Not a problem, Ken. Thanks for having us.
All right,
Yeah,
gentlemen. See ya.